Great day, everyone. Ed Dudley coming from Durham, North Carolina in America, and I'm with my absolutely amazingly beautiful co-host, Miss Charmaine Subramani. How are you?
I'm great, Zulu Hedge. Well, I'm coming from Johannesburg, South Africa. It's always fabulous. Well, it's 8 o'clock in the evening. It's past my bedtime. But being in the house...
Yeah, you go to bed early.
I do, actually.
Because you'll be sending me messages at like 1 in the morning my time. And I'm like, what is she doing?
Actually, 1 in the morning my time, 7 o'clock your time, because I'm up at 1 o'clock South African time. Well, I'm working, actually. Yeah.
You're a workaholic. So how have you been?
It's been a good day, actually. Busy, but good. Just being in your energy and being in your space just is even more incredible. So grateful to be here. So excited to be chatting.
I'm honored too with our next guest. I can't wait to bring him in and just talk to him a little bit. I've known him for a long time. When he was just as they like to say in the United States, a whippersnapper, just a small guy, and we actually played on a band together, and we'll talk about that later. I see your eyes. We'll talk about that later. I'm sure he'll have some stories, and then we'll have us all laugh a little bit. So I'm excited to bring into the Ubuntu house Dr. Najja Baptist. Sir, how you doing?
How y'all doing? Thank you so much for having me.
Man, it's a pleasure. It's a pleasure.
It's great to have you. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Greetings all the way to South Africa.
Johannesburg, South Africa. It's flipping amazing. And you have some Ghanaian background, don't you?
We were able to take our family back to East Africa. My father using traditional African names, of course. As an African American, being dislocated, relocated, and isolated, we had to figure it out for ourselves. But we always have, for some of us, some sort of connection to our African ancestry, and wanting to always look towards Africa, our mother country and continent.
Well, the funny thing is, if you look on my name, it's called Zulu Ed. Mm-hmm. We'll tell you about that story another time.
Okay.
Why they call me Zulu. But sir,
I think your brother didn't name you Zulu. I know that.
She definitely didn't name me Zulu. But it's a pleasure, like I said, it's a pleasure to have you on. And Absolutely. Introduce yourself to our listeners and our viewers. Tell them a little bit who you are, a little bit about your background, and how you became Dr. Baptist.
Oh man, the Dr. Baptist story is a way longer journey, but I usually so I teach Black politics, and I intentionally say that every time I speak it because not to be confused with simply just African American politics or African politics. I use an intersection of both. It's been a long journey. Eddie's known me since I was about 14 or 15 years old. Yeah. I'm a little bit over 40 now, right? I'm a little bit over 40. But the point is, you don't get to these places. I remember my first time being at my alma mater, Jackson State, and my professor told me about a box turtle. He said there's a box turtle that sits on a tree stump, and you know for a fact that something had to put that box turtle there, right? And it didn't get there on its own. So something had to lift it, something had to carry it, something had to put it on top of this 6-foot box, 6-foot tree stump. So I began my journey at 18. I was at Southern Durham. I grew up in Durham, North Carolina, the Bull City, right? And me deciding to go to college was big. I shared this story with my students ever so often about the idea of the trials and tribulations that you face trying to advance yourself as an African American student, dealing with institutional issues. So I was trying to apply my junior year for colleges, and my advisor at the time, Dr. Morris Pettiford, who's now over the guidance counselors in the state of North Carolina. Dr. Pettiford was over my high school fraternity, Theta Phi Psi. And so he encouraged us to apply to college because black males wasn't going to college. Or either they were going to Durham Tech, we call Lawson Street University. And he told me to go talk to my personal guidance counselor because he has a group of like 30 or 40 guys. And he's like, you have an assigned guidance counselor, she's supposed to take care of you. So I go to Miss Carmichael, tell her I want to apply. This is fall. Miss Carmichael tells me, she says, well, I'll get back to you. And then I go to her again. Miss Pettiford, Dr. Pettiford insists you need to go back to her again. Go back to her again. She says, well, you could just look in the file cabinet and maybe you could consider going to community college.
Oh my God. Are you being serious?
I'm devastated. Let me tell you, I'm devastated at the time. I go home to my mama. The Eddie knew my mother. My mother was a very forthright, and brilliant woman. And I go to my mother, and I am. She had broken me down. Like, I'm not worthy to go to college. I'm not able to go to college. I shouldn't go to college. That's what I felt from what she did. And my mother, she just leaned over in this very real passive way and said, "Baby, they told me and your daddy to go to community college. They told us that we should get a trade." And both my parents were HBCU graduates. My mama went to Coppin and Townsend. She graduated summa cum laude, and my father went to Morgan, right? So with this story, I finally, even though my mother had tried to still motivate me to keep going, I still ended up not applying to colleges. And I waited to almost the day, and everybody knew I wanted to go to NC State. I waited to the day to apply. I was not going to apply to college, but Dr. Morris Pettiford, I keep saying his name because he's the reason why I even got this far. Dr. Morris Pettiford says, "So what happened?" I told him everything that happened, and he was like, "Oh no," he was just, he was a 6'4" black guy, real heavy set. He was like, "Oh no, that's not happening. We're gonna go to her right now." So he goes to Ms. Carmichael and says, "You're going to help him find his application for NC State." And then so she helps me find the application. And then he said, "You're going to help him type." Now, as a matter of fact, you're typing the application. So she typed the application. Then he said, "You're going to mail this application." The only school I applied to was North Carolina State. And so we had this bulletin board at Southern Durham. And whenever you got your school notification, you could put your school up next to your name. And I remember calling. My mother said, "Well, just call to see." So I call them, and they said, "Oh, congratulations, you're a Wolfpack student." I'm so happy, right? My mom was so happy. I go to school. I tell Mr. Pettiford. He says, "Well, tell Miss Carmichael." Well, she says, "Well, I can't put your name up until I see the official letter."
I do want to interject. I don't need to, but I need to. Because I actually asked Ed as to why do you specialize in the fields that you have. You've actually answered the question.
Oh yeah. This is just the last part. I got to say this part. So when my letter gets there, the next day, that night, my mother says, "Okay, the next day I want you to wear all black to school." Now, the NC State letter comes on a white letterhead with red writing. My mother tapes the letter to my chest and tells me, "Do not take it off until you get to Mr. Pettiford." I walk into the office and Mr. Dr. Pettiford busts out laughing. He said, "Your mother told me she was going to do that." She said, "I can't take it off till you take it." He rips the letter off my chest and slams it on Miss Carmichael's desk and say, "Now you put a school up there."
You've said so many powerful things, right? And Ubuntu Connected is about community.
Yeah.
There's people in the community that's going to lift you and help you believe in yourself. And there's people in community that's going to break you. And you demonstrated that so beautifully.
Yeah.
It's so important to actually have people that support you. And it's so important to have strong women around you. And I'm just love and light to your mom. Hey, just let her know that I send just blessings. I'm sorry. I heard from Ed that your mom has passed recently, and
this makes 20 years. But I tell people, my mother front loaded me. she front loaded me with wisdom, pearls of wisdom and knowledge and information. And I grew up a lot faster than people my age because she knew she wasn't going to be here long. But one thing she taught me is the idea of it takes a village, right, to raise a child and to be a good person. I think we got to stop thinking that once we are out of adolescence that we don't need people. We don't need other people. We can do it by ourselves. Yeah. I think that's a function of trauma, and that's a function of cisgendered, patriarchal, capitalistic American society that says you have to do it by yourself. I can't. And so to have any sort of identity beyond this individualistic American identity is seen as threatening to the American zeitgeist, right? But that's just one of the many stories. I don't know if y'all want me to keep going because I have a few more.
Well, I do have one question.
Okay.
And can you? What was the race of Miss Carmichael?
Oh,
I can tell you.
She was a queer white woman.
Okay. So now I would really like to. I wish we could go back then, because how many other students did not have a mother like you?
Right.
That should have gone, but didn't go because they didn't have that village around them.
Yeah.
And we have so many people, black men in our society, that did not have a village around them, did not lift them up and push them out.
Yeah.
And that's why, we see so many black men really unfulfilled and not reaching their ultimate potential and destiny simply because they didn't have that village around them. So I'm proud. I'm so proud of you. So how'd you go from the letter on your chest for NC State? So you went to school in Jackson, Mississippi. So Charmaine, just so that you know and give some context for the people that are not in the state, Mississippi was the stronghold of the slave trade.
I know. I watched the movie.
Mississippi still to this day has some serious issues going on.
To this day.
To this actually day. My wife is from Mississippi, so I've been in Mississippi. I've seen stuff, and I'm like, whoa. How did you go from North Carolina State to Jackson, Mississippi?
Well, there's a brief pause in the story. So I went from NC State. I was at NC State for three years. My mother passed. The same semester that my mother passed, I was also told to go back to Africa. So I was taking this class. I mean, you can Google me, but I was taking this class with this professor, Dr. Floyd W. Hayes III. He's in Maryland now. He's a retired professor of Africana Studies. He wrote a book with Malana Karenga, who wrote Turbulent Voyage, who was the founder of Kwanzaa. I took his class and I started reading these books like Race and America by Joe Fagan. I was reading We Have No Leaders by Robert Smith. I was reading all this stuff and it was just like boom. I'm taking this one class on American Constitution, this other class on Black leadership, and it's conflicting. This is what education does. And one day I'm in class and a black student, because NC State, if you took a class of 70 people, maybe 5 were black inside of 70.
Yeah.
And it was, and one day I come in class and the professor asked me he said something about how many presidents owned slaves. Now he said 1 to 3. And I know Dr. Hayes had just said earlier, the day before, because it was almost like Monday, Tuesday, Thursday was Dr. Hayes. Monday, Wednesday, Friday was the Constitution. So Thursday, Dr. Hayes says it's 3 to 5. Friday, this white Latino guy tells me that it's only 1 to 3, and they really didn't own slaves. And so I told him that wasn't true. And he said, well, okay. And he kind of brushes me off. I packed my stuff up. Now, he ain't applauded me the week before for being such a prepared student. I packed my stuff up, go to the library for 5 hours. This is when I began my research career. I gotta preface all this to tell you how I got to Jackson. I began my research career there because I go to the bottom of NC State's library and I stay there for 5 hours. This is before Google, before the search engine. I come back the next class period. I raise my hand. I said, "You said there was only 3 to 5 presidents that owned slaves. I discovered there were 5 to 7 presidents that owned slaves." No, he said 1 to 3. I said 5. I found it was 5 to 7 that owned slaves. And that same semester, and so that next class, the sisters asked me where I'm getting all this information from. I'm telling them about Dr. Hayes' class. And I'm telling them about, the Black Mayafa. You can't compare it to the Native American Trail of Tears. And, we the only people that's been dislocated, relocated, isolated, stripped bare bone. And I'm saying this up before class. And there's a white lady sitting in the front who says, well, if you don't like America, you can just go back to Africa.
And what was your response to that?
Oh, I had just read Joe Fagan, Race and Ethnicity, and I had learned about how white folks say things to make you respond, to make you angry, right? I've also discovered now since I'm older that black folks are doing too, but that's a different conversation. But the idea of trying to provoke you to engage in a behavior that favors them, right?
Sure.
And so I said, I had just read that chapter. I had just read the chapter about, now, Joe Fagan is a white sociologist from Florida, but he's probably one of the most prolific scholars in race, ethnicity, and politics, right? And of course, I write from a particular field of black politics, but she told me to go back to Africa. We organized student protests, and I'm going to the radio station. All this stuff going on, and my mom passed the same year. After that happens, I was dealing with mental health issues because losing my mother was terrible. I was also pledging my fraternity, which didn't help physically or mentally at the same time, right? And so I took 2 years off to figure out what I was going to do with myself. I mean, it was a lot of rough time. Everybody know how close I was to my mother. A lot of rough times, a lot of dark times. And then I kind of fought my way out of that. And I was working as a financial advisor in Portland, Oregon. Don't ask me how I got to Portland, Eddie. I know. I see your face. I moved to Portland. I was just running it. I was running. I moved to Florida. I moved to Portland in those 2 years. I moved to Tampa. And then I moved to Oregon. And I worked as a financial advisor. I wasn't happy. I decided to come back, live there on my sister's couch that I gave her. Took the bus. Whenever my fraternity brothers and my friends would come by, I would ask them, I would say quarter, nickel, dime, anything to save me, right? They would give me, and I would buy, I still have it in my apartment. So I have an all-day pass for the data buses in Durham, the all-day pass. And I would take the bus ride from my sister's house to Central. Now, NC State has held my grants and shut down my student account and took back my grants because I engaged in protests. They were punishing me for engaging in peaceful protesting. So I couldn't get my transcript. Thanks to the late Dr. Kwabena Ashanti, who was one of the few Ashanti kings that was in America. He was also a psychologist at NC State. He got me my transcripts. I can say this now because he's dead and gone, and I got my PhD. And I wasn't supposed to be able to transfer, so I ended up transferring to North Carolina Central University. My bachelor's, summa cum laude, is from North Carolina Central University, the school I said I would never go to. That's what my mother say, never say what you won't do, right? I went to North Carolina Central, and I said if I ever got back in school, I was just going to go all the way through, and I was going to, do it at the highest level I could possibly do it. My last year at Central, I was selling at such a rapid pace that my mentor, Dr. Jarvis Hall, and my late chair, Dr. Jeffrey Elliott, paid for me to go to NCOAPS, the National Conference of Black Political Scientists. While in Chicago at my first NCOAPS as an undergrad, I sat on a panel speaking about an unknown candidate running for the presidency. His name was Barack Hussein Obama. And
I know him.
Yeah. And at the time, my prediction was he wasn't going to win because of several different factors, right? Really, the only reason he ran was one, because of the economic stuff, and because of the First in Flight trophy. But that's a different conversation that we can have. We're still chasing the First in Flight trophy, even with Ketanji Jackson Brown. But that's a different conversation. But I sat on this panel. While on the panel, he will eventually become my master thesis advisor, Dr. DeAndre Ori. I'm actually on 2 NSF grants right now. I was fully funded by the National Science Foundation for over $1.63 million. One grant looks at electoral political behavior. I do that with my co-PI at Georgia State, Dr. Perlu P.A. We went to grad school with. And my second grant is with Dr. DeAndre Ori from Jackson State. My grants refund every HBCU that I've gone to. I've given every HBCU I've gone to a total of $750,000 of $1 million. But so I'm at Central. He finds me. I was supposed to go to Penn State. The economy collapsed. I actually got recruited by Frank Bumgarner, who's at UNC. Dr. Ori pulls me to Jackson State. He said, come to Jackson State. When I tell you, I rode to Jackson State in my white Cadillac on a wing and a prayer. Because I bought a Cadillac as a gift to myself my senior year at Central 2008. Oh, pretty. I call her Pearl. It was pretty. She a pearl, blue interior. I loved it. I paid $1,200 for it. My frat brother got it for me. But everything I had, I was working at an adjudication camp for young men. And that's when I understood my impact when there were young black men that hadn't even heard about the idea of getting scholarship to go to college. They hadn't thought about college. They hadn't thought about the fact that even though they may have had some issues previously, that there are other opportunities. They didn't understand that they could be a Judge Mathis who had a criminal record and becomes who he is today. So Dr. Ori calls me up while I'm in the middle of an adjudication camp out in Three Springs, North Carolina, in the middle of the woods, nowhere. So country, Charmaine, they had a tick log to that where they can document how many times people were getting bitten by ticks. Oh, it's terrible. You talking about washing you had to wash your hand all the way down to your elbow because it was that dirty. That it was a Native American reservation, and you basically lived in tents and single trailers. And Dr. Ori had met me in Incos. He said, "Hey, what happened with?" He was my fraternity brother. He said, "Hey, what happened with Penn State?" I said, "Penn State fell through." He said, "Look, I ain't got no money to get you here, but if you can get here, if you can get to Jackson, Mississippi, I can find something for you." So I took my last little check from Three Springs. I drove from Durham, North Carolina to Jackson, Mississippi. I stopped in Atlanta, and my line brother, Brandon Taylor, gave me a McDonald's gift card, and that's what fed me all the way the rest of the way. Probably like 15 hours, 12 hours. And I got to Jackson. It was just overwhelming.
Yeah.
You seem to have had lots of challenges, but having said that, equally enough supports. There's people that supported you through your journey, right?
Well, you know, my advisor just said, God protect babies and foods. It's always prayer and perseverance that gets me through. There's nothing, I know that there's nothing that I have done personally to have deserved not just the mercy of God, but the grace of God that has gotten me this far. Because I tell people I tell people snapshots of my story, and they can't believe that I even survived. I have a line brother that used to say, "Well, if Najja can deal with all the stuff that he dealt with, I can do anything." Right? So when I got to Jackson was my first time realizing that there was a third world country in a first world nation. Third world country, first world. I mean, the roads are so bad. And here's the kicker: Jackson, Mississippi, is the capital of Mississippi. The governor of Mississippi does not live in Jackson. The governor of Mississippi lives in Oxford, an hour away. Jackson is a predominantly black city. They intentionally defunded Jackson, Mississippi, to the point that the potholes in the roads are so bad that they're craters, and you can bust your axle.
Tire.
No, not just a tire. The axle.
It's that bad.
It's that bad, right? It got so bad that it snowed. It dusted. I'm from Baltimore. It dusted, right? Snowed, which means you can still see the ground. And the water pipes burst in the city for 2 weeks.
It's actually sad, though. I mean, from a South African perspective, when we think of the States, okay, people that haven't traveled, they have a different view, actually. They think that Black Americans are pretty privileged. And you have equal opportunity, you have equality prevails, right? And it is the land of the milk and honey from an African perspective. But the reality is a far cry from what truly is, what happens on the ground. And I mean, your stories are telling.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, this is working class stories. Listen, you gotta understand, equality simply means you have equal right to be poor, hungry, tired, and oppressed. It does not mean you have equal access to anything. What we should be striving for is equity, not equality. I use a book in my recent class on racial identity called Black Ethnics, and it talks about the idea of Afro-Caribbeans, Africans, and African Americans, and their view of each other, and how it's shaped by this same white colonial power or neo-colonial power, as Nkrumah argues in the book Africa Must Unite. This same understanding that we have misperceptions, and the longer you are in America, the more you will realize that they sold you that so that way they can get your cheap labor here, and then once you get here, you realize it was all a ploy. And the longer you are in America, the more you realize how oppressive America is. And people think our problems ended in 64 and 65, 1964 and 65, not realizing that was just a repeat of 1864 and 1865. And that if you fast forward to 2022, as of yesterday, my mentor, Dr. Ori, is still talking about water crisis issues in Jackson, Mississippi today.
It's actually crazy, though.
I graduated from Jackson, Mississippi in 2010. There is no water crisis in Pearl where the white people are. There is no water crisis in Oxford where the mayor is. Why is that? So then across culture, darker people suffer more. Why is that? It's not simply about race, it's about these experiences. What I'm sharing is these experiences that we have and continue to have, and marginalized people have, and it's intersectional. Black women have it different from, based on Black poor people, and race, class, gender, sexual orientation, disability. All these things matter. But I like to say this emphatically. When I say Black, I mean those throughout the diaspora, and that Black liberation is human liberation. When you empower Black people around the world, you empower the world. When you empower Black Americans, you head closer to a more perfect union. But the issue is you can't do it demanding that people assimilate into the American identity, which is what I was saying earlier about individualism. We are naturally communal people. We are naturally wanting to help people. The Ubuntu model, the idea of lifting and climbing at the same time. Capitalism and racism is the lifeblood of capitalism.
So I want to touch on something because you made a comment about America being oppressive. So you're going to have some people from America are going to look at you. What is this man talking about? There is equality here. And then you're going to have some people from outside of America. And it's like, well, everything that we see is the land of milk and honey. If everyone can make it in America if you work hard. But you talk about the oppression. And you talked about Jackson, Mississippi still having a water issue. We don't talk about Flint, Michigan still having a water issue as well. They don't have clean water, Charmaine. And they haven't had clean water. They haven't had really clean water in, I think it's been almost a decade now. It's absolutely ridiculous. So can you quickly and eloquently explain to those that are watching why you feel as an American, America is oppressive, and then why the world views, well, I know why the world views America as not as oppressive. We can talk about the media, and because I know that's one of your specialties as well. But just give us your take on why you feel America is still oppressive.
Right. The notion is we have to separate America as a country versus America as an institutional system. The notion is, in political science, you learn something called systems theory. It's one of the oldest theories in political science. I learned it before I graduated with my PhD from the Mecca, the capstone, Howard University in 2020. But I specialized in Black politics for a reason. Howard's the only place you can get a PhD in Black politics, which means that I study oppressive regimes and systems throughout the world. and all we really study are patterns. Right, you can say, well, I have a PhD, so what's the problem? Right? That's easy to say if you're looking on the surface, not including the fact that you think of how HBCUs has been historically funded based on Ayers Fordyce and the recent HBCU cases that came out of Maryland.
So stop for 1 second. Charmaine, do you understand what HBCU is? Because I know some. So we're going to have viewers from across the globe, and some people may not understand what HBCU means. And they also may not understand the significance of Howard and where it actually is.
Yeah.
You touch on that real quick.
Yeah, no problem. So HBCU is an acronym for Historically Black College and University. The reason you have black fraternities, black sororities, black churches, black schools is because black folks were not allowed in those spaces. De jure versus de facto. De jure is by law. De facto is by nature. Segregation doesn't end simply because they ended in 64 and 65. Contemporarily, these HBCUs are now safe spaces for students to be able to deploy their identity while still getting high level of education. Now, let me just say this, and this, some people disagree, but not all HBCUs are created equal. Howard has always been seen as one of the most prestigious colleges, not just black colleges, but colleges in the United States. It graduates the most doctors, lawyers, medical doctors, you name it, we got it. And it intentionally connects itself directly back to Africa and African culture. So HBCU,
May I interject?
Yeah.
Why do they intentionally connect themselves to Africa and the black culture?
Because we're Africans, and the empowerment of us and in our identity is understanding where we come from. Okay. Right? It's a term called Sankofa. I'm sure you're familiar with it.
Yeah.
The nature of connecting it, because the idea of the American identity is one in which has already been defined for us. What it means to be American is already defined for us. Someone said, in order to be an American, you can't dress a certain way. You can't cut your hair a certain way. You can't, your food is not legible. Your language, your vernacular, even though no one in America speaks English, we speak American, which is a vernacular of English. You can't speak anything but English, right? What this essentially is, and this is what we talk about when I was talking about the institutional form of oppression. It manifests itself through culture. That's what politics plays out, right? We see it in, people not being able to get a job because their hair doesn't look a certain way. There's a Crown Act that came out about that.
So, Charmaine, I don't know if you're familiar with the Crown Act.
I do, actually.
There's a lot of people that are not, but the Crown Act stands for Create a Respectful and Open World for Natural Hair. And we had to put an act in place in the United States because so many African Americans were being discriminated against simply because of their hair. There's a story of one young man that was a wrestler, and they would not let him wrestle unless he cut his hair.
And they physically they grabbed him and cut his hair physically with scissors. There
was another young man that was the valedictorian of his class, and they told him, you will not speak in front of your classmates and at the ceremony unless you cut your hair. So that act had to be put in place to stop these discriminatory practices throughout the United States, unfortunately.
And that act was actually passed quite recently, right?
2019, was it? Or
something like that. Yeah, but that was mainly for the workplace, right? That doesn't prevent. See racism as a magic trick, or see it as a virus. It mutates and has new variants, right? I just gave a lecture about the dual pandemic, racism and the Rona. Right, and I argue that racism has been around way longer and has been way more pervasive. When we talk about racism, we're not talking about it in the terms of phenotypical race. We're not talking about skin color, right? You took down the signs that said black water fountain, white water fountain, but you didn't ensure equal access or equitable access to housing, equitable access to schools. Schools are funded in America based on bonds. So majority black areas are in non-housing areas. Predatory lending, which prevented it. Employment discrimination, last hired, first fired. People hired from within their own circles, right? We can go on and on. Gender discrimination, wage gap. These are all forms of oppression that we're still dealing with today. Environmental racism, etc., etc., etc. I mean, listen, I teach 4 or 5 classes a year, and I have to. And when I taught at Howard, I taught a little bit different because they already understood a lot of the fundamental stuff. But here, I have to start at ground zero, which means you have to take my intro to Black politics class. From that point, you can take my civil rights policy course, where you write a paper. From that point, you take my racial identity class. And then now I have a Black music and ideology class. You have to work your way up because you have to have foundational understandings. Because if you really understand how sophisticated and how nuanced oppression is, then you would understand the magic trick that really we spend more time trying to explain that it exists as opposed to fighting the fires that King said. And this is what the Dr. King that people don't want you to hear. When they talk about the American dream, he knew it was simply that. He also talked about the nightmare that every time Americans have tried to go cash a check, make demands on this system, that's what I was talking about earlier, the system, making demands on this system, they always are faced with neglect and oppression. Why? Because you're not fundamentally entitled to this. The original contract in America stops at the 10th Amendment. Clarence Thomas, who was used as a ploy, Clarence Thomas, Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas, Black Supreme Court Justice who took Thurgood Marshall's seat, ushers in the death of the Voting Rights Act in 2012, and therefore allows for racism to be then run rampant, because he says racism no longer existed and there was no need for government intervention. And he goes back to the 10th Amendment. Anything that's not explicitly stated in the Constitution is under the purview of the states. The Civil War is fought over states' rights versus the establishment of a federal government. And all that really means is that people that are in the majority, conservatives that are in the majority, in these states want to keep doing what they do. Alabama just passed a full abortion right, which means it makes it not just illegal, you can catch a felony. Even if you are raped, even if you are molested and dealing with incest, they don't care.
You know, it saddens me to think in this day and age, there's still so much oppression, right? And you teach the classes to create the awareness. But how do you change the actual narrative as to what actually happens on the ground? What is the recipe for change? Or how do you influence that? What is in the agenda for you and people like yourself?
I tell my students, I don't teach them what to think, I teach them how to think.
That's one aspect.
That's the fundamental aspect of understanding you must be critical and think audaciously and critically at all times. Mm-hmm. Really, you're not really dealing with, the Bible said we're not wrestling against flesh and blood, but principalities versus principalities. So what you're really dealing with is, and I created a flow chart that says ideas and values influences ideology, and ideology influences action. And so my goal in teaching my students is to teach them how to be better citizens, more accountable. James Baldwin said, if I love you, and because we love America, I must make her aware of things that she's doing wrong. The first thing is to empower students to be agents, right? To have agency, to be able to speak out on these things when they see injustices, right? And then to engage with other people that are like-minded. Also, Frantz Fanon said, the Algerian psychologist, that each generation must, out of relative obscurity, discover its mission, fulfill it, or betray it. So this is why I started social media as well, because the younger generation that's now younger than me, I can actually call somebody younger than me now, Eddie. The children's is now engaging in more innovative forms of protesting. Why does that matter? Because the system adapts. It is an organism. It adapts, and it adapts to it, and so you have to figure out more impressive ways. By being critical of yourself, Charmaine, by being critical of the world around you, this is what, see, they're scaring you with the notion of critical race theory. Everything that deals with intellectualism is critical. Everything. All of it is. Why? Because you're questioning stuff. Because you're comparing this to this. You're saying, how do you say this is a free country and we deal with these issues? How do you say everybody is equal yet not intervene when these things happen? That's what I teach my students. I teach my students how to be better citizens.
Fantastic.
Yeah. So I want to switch gears on you a little bit, because you brought up something, and I think we need to dissect a little bit and talk about. You talked about when you were in school and the loss of your mom, and you talked about how your mental health suffered. Mm-hmm. Mental health has really started becoming on the forefront of so much that we talk about right now, especially men's mental health. So if you can just talk a little bit of how you basically got back to where you were somewhat functioning to go back to school mentally, and then talk about, if you look at yourself right now, 40-year-old, go back and look at your 20-year-old self and say, what would you tell your 20-year-old self, to help mentally as a man and someone dealing with grief?
Yeah. I would tell my 20-year-old self, trust in God to see the light. That's what I would tell my 20-year-old self, because that was probably some of the darkest times of my life, right? And I think this is what I mean by the idea of being critical, because being critical of yourself. At that time, I engaged in a lot of substance abuse. That was marijuana and alcohol. And me moving from Oregon to Florida, et cetera, all that was me running away from the pain. The pain of losing my mother, the pain of the trauma that I experienced, the racial trauma that I experienced as a student, not being able to finish at NC State, the place it was so many different elements. And what I would tell someone that's going through it right now is that there is hope, right? And the hope is not simply just in everyone else around you. The hope is in understanding that it's normal to get weak. I think we as people care more about our body than about the mind. The mind controls the body. Strongest muscle. Now, we have a cough more than 2 weeks, we go to the doctor. But if we ain't talking, and I use the word ain't, using my African American vernacular English, because that's not an indicator of my intelligence. If we ain't talking to our family, right, or our loved ones, or isolating ourselves, we don't see that as illness. And so by the time we go and deal with our mental health issues, it had gone from a mental cold to pneumonia by the time we get to a doctor. And the same people that I mentioned, Dr. Floyd W. Hayes, Dr. Ashanti, these people intervened. You have to find something that makes you say, or someone that you know you can trust to be vulnerable around. That's another issue. The world is demonizes those that have suffered from mental illness. They demonize them. They're not realizing that everybody's suffering from some sort of flu, some sort of cold right now, right? And if you're not constantly checking in with yourself, it gets worse and worse. And you wonder why your marriages are having issues, your friendships are having issues, your job. It's all because you're not dealing with yourself first. And people aren't, ma'am?
Sorry, I'm sorry to interject. I was just saying you made some incredible points, actually. You were going through mental health. You indicated that it's not visible for everybody to see. Instead of dealing with it, you were running around with the hope that things will actually, you'll go to a new place and things will get better. So what I take out of that is you cannot run away from your problems. You have to find a way to actually deal with it. And what would possibly help most people is having conversations in safe spaces and find the right people to help them through it. That's actually necessary to land with people that are actually listening. I want to take you, Ed, may I take him back?
Take him way back. Way back.
Oh my God, do you know that song? Let's go back. Way back.
I just want to add real quick, it's also important to understand that we overwork ourselves and that we don't take breaks and that we wait until major vacation time to take breaks as opposed to micro times, and understanding that when you suffer from mental illness, it's like sustaining a major injury, like an ACLU tear. You're never going to run the same. You're going to always have the injury or that fear, but you can run stronger, you can run better if you understand that there's something to touch into. I contacted Dr. Hayes when I was at my lowest point, and all I could write in my email was the word help. And with that word help, he came and took me out that room. And even though he didn't have the skills and capacity to help me, he took me to someone who could and told me about his issues. We are afraid to be vulnerable because we are afraid people are going to take advantage of us. We are afraid to do more because we're fearful, because we are used to people hurting us, not understanding that we're hurt people hurt people. And the trauma that we sustain, we're just reproducing it over and over and over and over again. And somebody has to say, I love me and I love you enough to love you too. And so when people lose people now, I don't say I'm sorry or my condolences. I say my love for your pain, because I know the pain is there. But you don't have to fester and feed on it. If you continue to feed on it, the anger and the resentment and everything, and it'll start to become like an acid, and it would disintegrate from within. So to free yourself comes from being critical and accountable, and then setting boundaries and getting therapy. Yes, therapy. Try therapy. Still to this day, I go to therapy, right? I don't even really need it, but I go to my doctor every year to get a check-in. Why wouldn't I go to my psychologist or psychiatrist or therapist to get a check-in once a year? Do it. Get therapy.
All right, go way back, Charmaine.
Go way back. I'm sorry. I had to say that. I'm sorry.
I love, you recently asked, what does Black History Month mean to you? And I loved your definition, right? Do you remember your definition?
I don't. I listen, I write and type so much nowadays.
Awareness of the past to provide answers to the present and a blueprint for the future. What does that blueprint look? If you have to explain what that blueprint would ideally be or look like, what would it be?
So this is Afrofuturism, the future of us. The future for me, or just for the world as we see it?
No, whatever it means to you, actually. So because it's your words.
I think the future can only happen unless we dig into the mistakes, and shed the things in which we have done it in the past that are no longer sustainable. It's always a question of sustainability for me. Things that are no longer sustainable, we need to rid ourselves of. Strategies, people, places, those things that are no longer sustainable and adding to you. We shed those. And those things that work, we double down on. And then therefore we build the world. If you wanted to know the future or predict the future, create it. You create it now. You create it in doing better every day. Tomorrow is the future. People think futuristic and think 10 years from now. I think future as in what happens an hour from now, 5 hours from now, right? And understanding it's the nibble at the end of the road. If you continue to just work now, put in the work now. If I want to get, Dr. Dre body now, I got to go to the gym and work every day, right? If I want $1 million, it starts with understanding how to be a better savior, right? This is what I mean by being critical. The future is going to come to those that prepare for the day. That's what Malik Shabazz, El-Haj Malik El Shabazz, Malcolm X argues. The future belongs to those that prepare for it today. It starts today. It starts with wanting to be better, wanting to do better, wanting to understand the world better, and wanting to say, hey, this is not okay. Hey, this is okay. I have forgiveness for the person that offended me. I have forgiveness from God, and I also have forgiveness for myself, right? And that future then predicates itself on a more perfect person. That, even though that's terrible grammar, more perfect, a more perfect union, a more perfect idea
Dr.
of
Baptist,
shedding. Yes, ma'am.
if I had to give you a wand, a magic wand, to be able to infuse the world with something, what would it be?
Love, but not love in this romanticized way. Love that is patient, that is kind, that does not hold record, that wants the best for yourself and the world around you. I will infuse it with love, and not. And a writer, Frankfurt, wrote a piece called "The Reasons of Love," and what he says that to love is involuntary because you're supposed to love people like you love yourself. If you love a person like you love yourself, then that means that unless you are self-deprecating, you would not want to hurt that person. You would not want to see another person suffer. You would want to see everybody have an equitable chance. And listen, I want to preface this with this. I don't have no problem with making money. I just have a problem with making money at the expense of other people. I have the problem with having to step over people and hurt people in order to do it. And if I loved you, then of course I want to see you work hard and fulfill your dreams. I want to fulfill my dreams, and we can all do it together. It would be love.
Sure. Ed, what would it be for you?
Oh man, I'd pretty much say the same thing. You know, love. I mean, if we genuinely loved our fellow human beings, all the world issues that we have wouldn't exist. There would be hunger. There wouldn't be any gender-based violence. There wouldn't be any homelessness. There wouldn't be, just all the social issues that we have in this world. And so, but we don't love like we should. We have a lot of people that it's all about me, myself. I mean, I'm like Dr. Baptist. I have no problem with making money. But when I see individuals, God loved these individuals that are billionaires. Yeah. But you're spending so much money to go into outer space to do what? Look around and say, "Oh, I've been there." History won't remember that. You went into space, so what? You could have taken that money and invested into people. That lives a lifetime. Because guess what? You invested in this one person. Oh, Bill Gates invested into me. That's why we're where we are. And now you're telling your children telling their children, well, your great-grandparents, because Bill Gates invested in them, this is why we have the life that we have like now. So for me, it's love. So I already know with you, but for the audience, you got your magical wand and you're waiting around. What's going to happen?
Well, in addition to love, it would be kindness and empathy. Because if we paint the world kind, people will love more. People would want to understand people more. And the reason I say that, right, it's like, I'm just going to give you an example. About 4 years ago, I was visiting family down in Natal. I live in Johannesburg. And there was a little African kid in the yard, and I always talk to everybody. And I was like, what is this kid what are you doing here? He was around 10. He was working in the garden. That's child labor. So I go in and I go, why is a 10-year-old working in the garden? And there was like, oh no, because he can work. So my question is, would you allow your kid that's 10, your grandchild, to work in the garden? No. As a result of a lack of awareness and kindness, people do not see their blind spots. And it is important for people like you, me, and Ed, and all the champions and ambassadors to create that level of awareness. They didn't realize, they didn't see the 10-year-old as a child because they were blinded to it. They didn't care. There was no awareness. There was no kindness. And a 10-year-old working is child labor, right? In any bloody world, even in China. But we are prepared to allow that to actually happen. So the point I'm making is this world has a lot of work to do.
We do.
Our wands are not going to create that love or create that kindness or create that care. It is conversations that's deep, like here, that's probably going to land with one person and
That's all it takes. It's a ripple effect.
And make that ripple effect. And we need to have the courage to call out members of our family as well.
Yeah.
And not shy away from that. And whatever space we're in, it is about being authentic, it's about being real, and allowing that same level to apply to every single individuality or every single individual. Because what we fail to see, people as humans, I mean, I think Craig Wilkinson said it beautifully. I mean, I say it often, but just the way he said it. We are human beings first. And then second, we're a male, female, black, white, mixed race. And if we can get the world to just observe it on that basis, I mean, I feel your pain, Dr. Baptist. I understand. I've not walked in your shoes, but the elements that you've actually shared, the loss of your mom, the loss of the fact that a teacher or an administrator in a school did not have faith in your ability to go to university. Ed and I had a conversation with somebody else where we said, teachers have such a profound impact on individuals like ourselves. They either break us or they build us. And whichever teacher is listening to this bloody podcast needs to be conscientious and ensure that they are the builders and not the breakers, whether we're black, white, Indian, mixed race, colored, Chinese, whatever. We all want love. We all want to give kindness and we all want to receive kindness. So if we could, like, I mean, like, I read extensively. I followed the American history, the African history. I mean, we have the social evils here as well, right? But we are seen, when I say we, South Africa is seen as a third world country. It just like grates me to think America, and for all the money and all the wealth and all of that, there's still so many levels of inequality and poverty and unemployment and things of that sort. So I don't know what the recipe is, but we need to bloody do something about it. And if it's just one act of kindness daily,
that's it.
That will actually change the momentum.
It's also understanding not simply just us being human and in universal setting, but the differences of humanism, right? And the idea that we should not be a melting pot, but a mosaic. Allow people the autonomy and space to create the piece and fragment that they want to add to the humanity, not just make everybody one universal person. We're not. We have different experiences. And don't just simply try to deal with this sort of diversity false myth, but deal with cultural competence. Allow people to show you where they are, who they are, what they have experienced. And in those conversations, understanding your privilege that you may have as a male or as being affluent or being American or et cetera, et cetera. It is in the deficiencies that we learn and create a more perfect world.
I agree with you.
So go ahead, Charmaine. I'll let you go ahead.
I don't know.
No, I was gonna say I'm the gear switcher. So Charmaine loves music. Like Charmaine is always dancing. She's always listening to she listens to all types of music. So like if you could pay it out, she'd probably jump on the table and start dancing. she's crazy like that. So my question to you, Dr. Baptist, do you still play an instrument?
So here's the Eddie story, Charmaine.
So wait, hold on. See, we don't need to share Eddie stories.
I want to hear the Eddie story.
So real quick, hold on. Real quick, there's three versions of me. There's Edward, there's Eddie, and there's Ed. Ed is the professional one that most people know. Then there is Eddie that certain people know from a certain segment of my life. Then there's Edward. That Edward that's like when my mom gets mad and somebody's mad at me, or somebody's just meeting me for the first time. That's Edward. So if you tell a story that I think you're going to tell, you and I are gonna have a problem. Okay. So, but go ahead. I'm gonna let you go.
That's a threat right there. But my point is, I'm a grown man now. So my point also is this. My love and affinity for music comes from my singing using two instruments, both my voice. I toured the country with a closed group audition only course, and I sung all through our church services. I was the deacon that started service most of the time, and played on the church band. And me and Eddie had that in common because me and Eddie Eddie is a singer. Y'all don't know that Eddie's a singer. Eddie's a great singer. I don't know if he can still do it now, but Eddie reminded me of Eddie Kendricks. I don't know if you ever heard of "Keep On Trucking, Babe." That's the tone of Ed.
Oh, come on, Ed, drop us a... Come on.
I'm not going to... I mean, but the point is, I still... matter of fact, they brought me out of retirement, Eddie. I had stopped playing for about 15 years. I stopped playing at probably 23, 24, something like that. And I moved to Baltimore while I was finishing up my dissertation. And I go out to service. I'm just trying to do my thing. I'm just, I'm still 1 foot in, 1 foot out, doing my thing. And my cousin was like, hey, told the guy leading the band, church band, we have a band, consider it like an orchestra, a church orchestra, full of wind instruments, and we play by ear. We don't play by music. And so a lot of us grew up playing. And so we practice regularly, like once a week, right, growing up. And I grew up with musicians. Like Eddie is a musician. He has a wonderful ear, and he has a improvisation. So if you think about jazz, think about what jazz means. And I tell this even when I teach my black music politics. Jazz is an important staple in black music because it connects this whole the previous genres of music, and it also predicts the new one. So you get mumble rap because of scatting, right? And so the type of music that we did was jazz, and jazz is about expression, self-expression. But it's music too, yeah. So they asked me to play. I started playing again, and I opened up my case. Oh, and Daryl is the bass horn player. He know who Daryl is. I said Daryl. Daryl is the bass horn player in Baltimore. He's still playing. And so I opened up my case. I call her Lucille. I opened up Lucille, and I had music sheets, song sheets from when me and Eddie were playing. I still have it to this day.
Wow.
Lucille. And I picked the horn up, and these boys playing the different keys now, and they playing F sharp.
Charmaine, just to let you know how long ago that was probably 23 years ago.
Yeah.
So for him to open that case and still have that after 23 years is, first of all, it's impressive. And it shows me that you haven't opened that case in forever.
Yeah, in forever. I forgot. I had the soaker, I had to get it right. And, these guys now, the younger guys, they play in different keys. And so when you playing the trombone, we play the trombone. When you playing the trombone, we play A flat, B flat, and maybe a little D, right? These guys are playing E, F sharp, F natural, right? And I just look, I had to tell them at one point, look, just tell me where to start, and I'll fix it, right? So tell me my first note. And I had to tell folks, listen, I know, we have different positions, third, tenor man, run man. I said, listen, I ain't no third, I'm a tenor man. You see what I'm saying? I put tenor man is important, but yeah, man, music is everything to me. It's always been, because music is an artifact that points to the spirit of everything that we've gone through. So I have a forthcoming book. I have to start promoting my book more. People, my publicists tell me I have to promote. My book is coming out next year. It's called In the Spirit, in the Dark. And it's going to be promoting, talk about black music and black politics. But essentially what I argue is that people's musical choices are a function of their identity, right? And so this point of the spirit of who we are, it's just embodied inside the music, and music becomes a placeholder for it. And we take it. So when we go back and listen to Bob Marley, or we go back and listen to Fela Kuti, right? I know you love that. Fela Kuti, or you go back and listen to any sort of singer, Nina Simone. If you go back and listen to these people, they have taken that identity and that memory, and they have encapsulated it right there.
Yeah. Well, right. I'm glad that you still play. I tried to pick up a horn some years ago, and just I don't have the chops anymore. So
you gotta keep at it, and you gotta ride the fight.
Yeah. But we appreciate you so much. Spending a little bit of time with us. Charmaine, do you have any last words of wisdom that
No,
you'd
this
like to
has been
share?
phenomenal. I mean, I love what you do. I love the way you use your story and your journey to actually impact lives. You really do. I hope, as a result of you, many more Black men are going to go. If he can do that, I can do that. And you're going to. Oh, I see it. I see your Ubuntu, my darling. It looks amazing. Together we can, right? And that's the intention behind what we do. So it's been phenomenal. I've learned a lot. I mean, I'm a perpetual learner, so you landed some amazing books, points for me to consider. So I'm grateful. It was really good having you here, Dr. Baptist.
So,
thank you for your time.
So, Dr. Baptist, I appreciate you, and I've said it to you privately, and I'll say it to you publicly. I'm so proud of you. I'm so proud of where you come from and what you're doing right now, and keep it up. People are watching you. And more importantly, the young men are looking at you and listening to your story, saying that I did it and you can too, even in the midst of challenges, man. So keep doing it, man. I love you. Proud of you. Thank you very much for being here. Once again, this is the Ubuntu Connected podcast. We had Dr. Baptist in the Ubuntu house just sharing a little bit of his knowledge and wisdom and history with us. And we thank him for joining us. And until next time, we will see you again. Take care, everybody.
Love and light, everyone.